The air in the courtroom didn't just hang, it pressed down like a weight, thick with unspoken judgment. Isabella Ford stood at its center, hands cuffed in front of her, shackled at the ankles, the chain dragging faintly as she shifted her stance. Her uniform had long since been stripped away, replaced by the dull blue of federal custody, but she stood as if it still clung to her shoulders. Not with arrogance, with purpose. Her eyes didn't scan the room. She didn't search for sympathy in the jurors who had convicted her or the reporters who scribbled with eager pens or the brass sitting behind her in silent condemnation. She faced forward, calm, still, her silence a kind of defiance. The judge's gavel echoed once more. Before sentencing is finalized, does the defendant have any final statement to make? Isabella raised her chin slowly. Her voice, when it came, was clear and quiet. No statement, Your Honor. Just one request. The judge arched an eyebrow, unimpressed. Make it. Isabella took a breath. Permission to render a final salute to the flag, and I'd like my partner present. There was a pause, as if the courtroom itself didn't know how to respond. Partner? Vesper, she said. My K9. I haven't seen him since the day I was arrested. A ripple moved through the gallery. Confused murmurs, exchanged glances. The judge looked down at her paperwork, then back at Isabella. This is highly irregular and not customary for someone convicted of treason. Isabella's voice didn't waver. I served this country. So did he. The judge stared at her for a long, heavy beat, then sighed, long and tired. Fine, one salute, one dog. Keep it brief. A bailiff disappeared through the side door, and the courtroom remained still, the tension growing rather than breaking. Isabella didn't react. She just stood there, eyes locked on the folded flag that hung at the front of the room, the very symbol she'd once sworn her life to protect, and now stood accused of betraying. She didn't flinch as a camera flash went off. She didn't lower her head when an officer behind her muttered, "Disgrace." She simply waited, because this wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about redemption. It was about one final truth, and it hadn't arrived yet, but it would, on four legs. The side door creaked open with a metallic groan, and for a moment, no one in the courtroom moved. Then came the sound, claws on tile, steady and sharp, echoing with the rhythm of memory. Vesper entered the room like a shadow returning to its rightful place. His coat, still a rich sable despite the months apart, shimmered under the courtroom lights. Lean muscle moved beneath his frame with disciplined control, but his ears were pricked forward, his eyes locked, already fixed on her, on Isabella. She didn't call out, she didn't move, but her breath caught for half a heartbeat as he stepped through the quiet. Vesper didn't sniff the air or look around like an ordinary dog would. He walked a straight line through the aisle, past rows of whispering observers, past wary guards and skeptical brass, until he reached her. And then, without command, he sat, right at her heel, as if he'd never left. His tail didn't wag, his ears didn't droop. He simply existed beside her, still focused, ready. The same posture he held beside her during briefings in the secure comms room, the same stillness he carried when she decrypted signals in desert field tents with only heat and tension buzzing in the air. The same unspoken bond. Isabella looked down slowly, meeting those familiar eyes. Something moved in hers then. Not a tear, not a flinch, just a softness that hadn't been seen in her since the day she was taken into custody. A softness that only he could summon. The bailiff nearest to them tensed, hand resting nervously on his sidearm. One wrong move, one loud sound, and the courtroom could erupt. But Vesper didn't growl, didn't twitch. He was trained for chaos. But more than that, he was trained to run her, and she was calm. So he was calm. The judge glanced toward the handler at the door, who gave a small nod of acknowledgement. But even he looked unsure. Vesper had been isolated since Isabella's arrest, stored like classified hardware. A war hero reduced to property, untouched, uncommanded, until now. Now he sat with purpose, as if the last few months hadn't broken the bond but sharpened it. And still, no one spoke, because somehow, in his silence, Vesper said enough. He wasn't here for a performance. He wasn't here for pity. He was here for her. Whatever happened next, he would not look away, and neither now could anyone else. The judge gave a terse nod, signaling the moment had come. Isabella took one slow step forward, chains clinking faintly with each movement. She turned to face the flag, that silent fabric stitched with too many memories, too many ghosts. Her hands rose with purpose, left behind her back, right at her brow. It wasn't mechanical. It was muscle memory, a gesture forged over years of briefings, deployments, and coded silences. A salute not to absolve, but to acknowledge. The courtroom held its breath. Even the reporter stopped scribbling. The moment stretched, timeless and still. Then Vesper shifted. No command, no signal. He just moved. Smooth and sudden. The courtroom gasped as his front paw lifted with eerie precision. He placed it squarely on the left side of his chest and held it there, unshaking, unwavering. Not a trick, not a fluke. Something else, something deeper. Isabella didn't move, but her eyes widened. She knew what it meant. The motion Vesper made wasn't one of obedience or loyalty. It was protocol, a specific gesture trained only into select canines attached to high-level signal teams. The movement signified one thing, and one thing only: compromise command. Echo 47, a forgotten field code, an emergency flag that couldn't be spoken aloud, a signal only issued when an operative believed the chain of command had been infiltrated. Vesper held the pose, still and rigid. A murmur rippled through the courtroom like a tremor before the quake. The judge leaned forward, confusion mixing with something close to concern. "What is he doing?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Across the room, a Navy officer in full-dress blues stood so fast his chair toppled. "That's a signal," he said, voice tight. "An active signal." "What kind of signal?" the prosecutor asked, rising slowly, eyes narrowing. "That dog was trained in a top-tier cyber comms unit. That paw gesture, it's part of an old emergency protocol." "Echo series," the officer muttered, scanning Isabella's face. "Which one was he assigned?" Isabella didn't blink. "Echo 47. "That's impossible," the prosecutor snapped. "It was decommissioned." "Decommissioned," the officer interrupted, "but never deleted." The silence returned, but it wasn't empty now. It was loaded, armed, and everyone in the room understood that something had shifted. Not a trick, not theater, a treason. And codes always mean something. The clock didn't just pause in that moment, it rewound, because whatever they thought they knew about Isabella Ford was about to change. Chaos didn't explode in the courtroom. It crept in slow and spreading like a chill through the bones of every person who understood what they just witnessed. Vesper's paw remained over his chest for 3 full seconds, then dropped gently to the floor. The motion was over, but the message had already detonated. The judge narrowed her eyes, voice sharp but strained. "Is someone going to tell me what just happened?" Across the gallery, the Navy officer who'd stood now looked like he'd swallowed a live wire. That dog didn't just salute. He activated a flag. The prosecutor scoffed. "You can't be serious. It's a gesture. He was trained, clearly." "That gesture," the officer snapped, "is part of a deprecated emergency protocol known as Echo 47. You'd only know it if you were embedded in deep field signal units. It was designed as a nonverbal alert in hostile territory when verbal comms were compromised." "Compromised?" The judge repeated, her voice harder now. You mean infiltrated? Yes, the officer said. It means he believes the chain of command is corrupted. Murmurs swelled. In the back, a woman in civilian clothes leaned in to whisper to the court clerk, her voice barely audible. I know that signal, she said. I used to interpret field responses for naval encryption units. That dog just accused someone in their room of sabotage. The clerk's eyes went wide. He passed the message forward. The judge blinked, just once, then banged her gavel 3 times. Proceedings are halted immediately, she declared. Clear the jury. Lock down the evidence. I want everyone in this room identified and accounted for. Reporters sprang to their feet. Security moved fast, ushering jurors out and sealing exits. But all eyes kept flicking back to one place. Vesper, who now sat in perfect stillness, gazed steady, as if waiting for someone else to catch up. Isabella didn't move, didn't smile. She simply lowered her hand and stood tall beside him, her expression unreadable. Echo 47 hasn't been used in nearly a decade, the prosecutor said through clenched teeth, and the only operatives cleared for it. He stopped. Realization hit like a thunderclap. Everyone turned to Isabella. She met their gaze without blinking. I was one of them, she said. So was Vesper. The courtroom felt colder now, heavier, like the truth had stepped in and was waiting to be acknowledged. Because Vesper hadn't just performed a trick. He'd pulled a trigger, and somewhere in the shadows of protocol and power, someone was about to get exposed. The courtroom that once rang with judgment now buzzed with controlled panic. The judge ordered a temporary recess, but no one left. No one could. Military officers crowded near the bench. Court clerks scrambled with headsets, whispering codes into secure lines. A forensics team arrived within the hour, escorted by a lieutenant from Naval Intelligence summoned straight from Quantico. They didn't need prompting. They already knew what they were looking for. What they didn't expect was how fast they found it. In the archives, buried beneath layers of encrypted correspondence and declassified debris, they discovered a cluster of communication logs Isabella had flagged over a year ago. At the time, they'd been dismissed as false positives, routine pings, overlapping metadata, brushstrokes on an otherwise clean canvas. But now those brushstrokes look like fingerprints. A junior analyst hooked into the backup servers with trembling fingers. One by one, the logs lit up on the screen, and suddenly what Isabella had once tried to explain became horrifyingly clear. The IP trail wasn't foreign. It had been rerouted through an internal Navy server, then bounced through a foreign node to disguise its origin. Whoever engineered it had gone deep, reprogramming the access points to mimic a cyber profile used by foreign intelligence agencies. A ghost mask, the signature of betrayal, designed to look like an outside attack. This wasn't just a leak, one of the analysts muttered. It was a frame job. The judge demanded a secure line to the Pentagon. The prosecutor, pale and silent now, stood back as if distance could spare him from the implications. Isabella sat at the defense table, still shackled, still silent, her face unreadable as the truth unfurled around her like a long-buried flag. Vesper remained beside her, still and alert, as if he too had known this moment was coming. The log showed Isabella had flagged the anomalies 5 separate times, escalating through proper channels. Each time her report had been stamped, reviewed, no threat identified. But it wasn't a system error, it was an override. Someone had intercepted her warnings and redirected them, cutting her off, discrediting her findings, and setting her up as the source. She hadn't betrayed her country. She'd caught the one who did. The courtroom had spent months condemning her. Now it struggled to look her in the eye. And as the judge called for an emergency hearing to re-examine the charges, Vesper's head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something only loyalty could hear. The chain of command hadn't just failed, it had been rewritten. And Isabella Ford was the one who traced the line back to the beginning. The room had grown colder despite the heat of unraveling lies. As investigators pieced together corrupted logs and manipulated channels, another detail surfaced, quietly, almost as an afterthought. A handler from Naval Intelligence, trained in canine tactical outfitting, walked slowly around Vesper, eyes narrowing. He crouched, fingers brushing lightly against the seams of the dog's vest. "This panel," he murmured, "it's thicker than it should be. Sewn shut, not clipped." The room stilled again, that same hush that always seemed to follow Vesper like a shadow. "It's standard issue," the prosecutor offered weakly, but the handler was already unzipping a surgical pouch from his belt, slipping out a scalpel. "Not this kind. This panel was modified post-deployment." With surgical precision, he sliced through the reinforced stitching. Threads peeled away. Inside the pocket, wedged deep in the lining, was a flash drive the size of a fingernail. Matte black, no markings. The handler held it up with the gloved fingers. "This was never meant to be found unless you knew to look for it." Within minutes, it was plugged into a secure laptop. The screen flickered, then opened. First came video, grainy but clear. Footage from a body cam dated 6 months before Isabella's arrest. Vesper's POV. The timestamp aligned with the intercepted transmission Isabella had been accused of leaking. The footage showed her in a mobile operations tent, headset on, reading out a data stream aloud, her voice urgent. "Command, we've got a double bounce IP mimic rerouting internal pings through Jakarta's ghost nodes. Someone's framing this signal to look foreign." She paused, then turned toward Vesper's mounted camera. "If this gets intercepted, if something happens to me, Vesper knows." The room was silent except for the soft hum of the laptop. The video cut out, then a voice memo autoplayed. Her voice again, this time quieter. "Tired. If you're hearing this, the protocol. Failed. I didn't betray anyone. I tried to stop the breach, but someone buried it, and they're going to bury me with it." The file ended. The handler looked up from the screen, face pale. "She encoded the truth in her deck," he said, "carried it with him like a soldier under orders." The judge closed her eyes, breathing slow and sharp. Outside the room, cameras still waited for a statement. But inside, something far louder had just spoken. Isabella didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The proof had always been beside her, watching, guarding, carrying the very thing they tried to erase. The truth, hidden in a vest, guarded by loyalty, and revealed by the one soul they hadn't accounted for. The room buzzed with quiet fury as analysts cross-referenced the drive's metadata. Every frame, every packet of code pointed in one direction, up the chain. Embedded deep in the routing logs, layered beneath decoy protocols, they found a signature. Not from an outsider, not from foreign interference, but from someone within their own command structure. The name appeared like a phantom in a mirror. Lieutenant Commander Grant Haynes. It didn't register immediately for the civilians in the room, but Isabella's gaze locked on the screen the second the name surfaced. Her jaw tightened. Her hands, still cuffed, curled slightly. She had spoken his name once before, during her interrogation, but it had been dismissed as a desperate attempt to deflect blame. Now it was the missing puzzle piece. Haynes wasn't just her supervisor. He was the senior officer responsible for signing off on her threat reports. The one who had the power to flag them, bury them, or escalate them. He'd chosen the second, and just 4 days before Isabella was arrested, he'd been quietly reassigned to a diplomatic post overseas, far from any courtroom, far from any subpoena. He never testified, never even submitted a statement. His departure had been labeled routine. But now, as the digital trail unraveled, it revealed that encrypted traffic had been bouncing through a private server registered under a false civilian name, an alias tied to an offshore shell company connected to Haynes's known aliases in covert ops. He rerouted everything, the forensic tech muttered, scrolling through lines of code like they were confessions. He framed her to cover his own exfiltration, used the appearance of a foreign leak to divert attention, and left her holding the weight of the breach. The judge said nothing. She just stared. Because this wasn't just about sabotage anymore. It was betrayal, calculated, surgical, and carried out under the mask of command. The prosecutor, once so certain, now stood like a man trying to disappear. Isabella didn't speak. She didn't gloat. She simply looked down at Vesper, who met her eyes with that same unshakable focus. They had survived war zones together. But this had been something colder. And yet, the truth had found a way through, not through rank, not through protocol, through a dam, through silence, through the code that refused to be erased. Lieutenant Commander Haynes was still out there, but his shadow was now marked. And Isabella Ford, traitor no more, was about to step back into the light he tried to steal. The courtroom reopened not with fanfare, but with a kind of reverent dread, as if everyone stepping inside knew something sacred had been broken and something dangerous had been exposed. The judge returned to the bench slower than before, her hands steady, but her eyes no longer detached. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't glance at the prosecution. She just began to read. Following the emergence of concealed communications data, direct forensic links to a personal server operated under a false civilian identity, and the presence of corroborating voice logs previously withheld, this court has reviewed all admissible materials pertaining to the case of United States Isabella Ford. Her voice didn't waver, but the silence that followed her words was sharper than any gavel. She looked out over the room, eyes lingering not on the prosecutor nor the brass that once sat in quiet condemnation, but on Isabella herself. This court finds that the basis for the original conviction was built upon willful suppression of evidence and misrepresentation of fact. The prosecutor stood, lips parted, but no words came. He knew. Everyone did. The jury watched from their enclosed box, expressions frozen. One woman blinked fast, like she was trying to process a different story unfolding than the one she had been told to believe. The judge continued, "We find that the defendant acted in accordance with duty and that her efforts to report a security breach were met not with investigation, but with targeted silence and retaliation." She closed the folder, exhaled slowly. "The conviction of Isabella Ford is hereby vacated." Then she looked up, voice flattening into something absolute. "Dismissed." The word echoed like a crack in a dam. For a moment, no one moved. Then a collective breath escaped the gallery, the sound of release, of a courtroom remembering it was human again. Isabella didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply lowered her head, eyes closing for a single second. Vesper remained seated at her side, unblinking, his gaze still locked on her, as if waiting for the next command, the next mission. But it was over. The label, traitor, evaporated in a single syllable, and in its place stood something truer, heavier, earned. The chains weren't just removed, they dissolved under the weight of truth. And in the middle of the courtroom that once called her guilty, Isabella stood unchained beside the only soul who never doubted her. The silence roared louder than applause ever could. The courthouse doors opened into a wall of flashing cameras and rising noise. Reporters surged forward like a tide breaking loose, their questions colliding in the air, shouted demands for quotes, headlines forming in real time. But Isabella Ford didn't stop. She stepped into the light with Vesper at her side, both of them framed by the building they'd entered in chains and now exited in truth. The Navy's official statement hit news outlets within minutes. Isabella Ford has been fully exonerated. Internal reviews confirm she acted in line with security protocol to prevent further compromise of sensitive systems. Her actions qualify her as a whistleblower under protected status. Another line followed, quieter but bolder. K-9 Vesper is hereby awarded the Naval Commendation for service and bravery. The world moved quickly now, journalists scrambling to rewrite the narrative they'd helped paint, headlines shifting from traitor sentenced to hero silenced. But Isabella didn't bask in it. She didn't look for cameras. She didn't try to explain what had already been proven. She just walked forward, chin up, shoulders squared, not with pride, but with the calm of someone who had carried the truth through fire and refused to let it die. At the edge of the stairs, she paused. Behind her, the courthouse murmured with the weight of what had happened. Officers who once avoided her gaze now stood still, silent. Civilians lowered their phones. Even the brass, rigid in their uniforms, looked uneasy. Isabella turned, slowly, and faced the flag that still waved above the courthouse doors. The same flag she'd saluted on the day they branded her a traitor. This time, there were no chains around her wrists, no judgment weighing down her breath. She raised her hand in salute, clean, precise, deliberate. Emotion not of defiance, but of reclamation. A salute not just to the symbol, but to the oath she had kept when others broke theirs. And beside her, as if the moment had been waiting all along, Vesper lifted his paw again, pressed it to his chest, and held it there. The crowd, caught in that quiet spell, rose. One by one, like a ripple through conscience, they stood. No one told them to. No one needed to. Because when loyalty speaks, true loyalty, it doesn't shout. It reminds. And in that moment, with a soldier and her dog standing beneath the flag that had nearly betrayed them both, the truth marched out not in fury, but in silence. And the silence said everything. The ceremony wasn't announced to the press. There were no headlines, no podiums wrapped in microphones, no cameras jostling for position. Just a quiet breeze brushing through the flags at half-mast, a circle of service members standing in formation, and a podium placed under a pale blue sky at the edge of Naval Base Coronado. It was the kind of recognition Isabella Ford never asked for and never expected to receive. Her uniform had been restored, no longer a number stitched into prison fabric, but a name returned to its place in service history. She wore it without flourish, a subtle pin above her heart denoting her reinstatement, the edges of her ribbons catching the morning sun. Vesper sat at her side, a silver commendation medallion clipped neatly onto his service vest, polished until it gleamed. He didn't fidget, didn't blink, just sat there as he always had, still, aware, waiting. A commander read the citation aloud, his voice firm but reverent. The words echoed through the open air, each one slicing through the silence like a folded flag being unfurled. For unwavering commitment to national security, integrity in the face of betrayal, and courage displayed in upholding operational truth, Petty Officer First Class Isabella Ford and K-9 Vesper are hereby recognized for distinguished service under duress. Applause followed, but Isabella didn't bow her head she didn't raise her fist. She simply stepped forward, shook the commander's hand, then knelt beside Vesper. And that's when it happened. A base photographer, stationed quietly to the side, caught the frame that would outlast the medals. Isabella on one knee, her hand resting gently on Vesper's collar. Her eyes not on the audience, but on him. Behind them, the flag fluttered, this time not as a backdrop to judgment, but to restoration. The image hit social media within hours. No hashtags, no slogans, just a single caption beneath it. written by a young recruit who had witnessed the entire trial, watched the arc of accusation bend back into truth. Loyalty never lies, and sometimes the truth wears a uniform. It went viral in hours, not because it was loud, but because it was real. Because in a world where stories twist and fade, and headlines change by the minute, this one held steady. A woman, a dog, and a truth carried between them like a heartbeat. They had walked through silence together, through betrayal, through doubt, and they had come out the other side not with vengeance, but with honor, loyal, unshaken, and finally, heard. And so in the end, it wasn't a courtroom speech or a declassified memo that cleared Isabella Ford's name. It was a single gesture from a dog who never forgot what she stood for. Vesper didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His loyalty told a story of silence, sacrifice, and the kind of truth that refuses to stay buried. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that honor doesn't always wear medals, and sometimes justice walks on four legs, then join us. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories of courage, loyalty, and redemption. Because the world may try to silence heroes, but we make sure they're heard.